everybody. Welcome to our Earth Day celebration and our Clean Footwear Summit. We've got an audience here as well as our viewers at home, so welcome to everybody. My name is Shannon Scott. I am the founder and president of ComunityMade, which is where we're hosting this event today. Founded in conjunction with my husband, Sean, who you're going to hear from in just a little bit. And we partnered with our good friends at BLUMAKA to bring this event to you today, so we're really excited to hear. We've got a lot of lively panelists, so that's going to be fun. It is going to be interactive, so if you have any questions, please type them into the live stream, or we'll open up for the audience for questions as well. So, with that being said, I'm going to introduce you to Stuart Jenkins, the founder and CEO of BLUMAKA. So, Stuart, take it away.
Thanks, Shannon. Great to be here, and thanks to you and Sean for hosting. I know you did most of the work, because I know Sean. Welcome to the Clean Footwear Summit. I'm going to lay out a few ideas that the panelists will react to, I think, later on. They don't know what I'm going to say, so we're really going to get some spontaneity in their responses, I hope. But I believe in truth in advertising, and since we know there's no such thing as clean footwear, only cleaner footwear. And really today what we're going to talk about is how to make cleaner footwear. And my sense is that that is going to result from a lot of people making individual and collective choices. Designers will make choices, the developers will make choices, brands will make choices, marketeers will make choices, consumers will make choices. And those choices are going to determine how green we can make footwear or how clean we can make footwear. And I think that my sense is there's a few areas that are really important to focus on. One is what are shoes made from? What is footwear made from? And there's been a lot of focus on that. And I applaud my friends at Bloom and Sweet Foam and others who are really focusing on what are the materials that we're using. That's a good thing. Next is how are shoes made? What is the process for making them? And that process is still pretty dirty and not as transparent and not as talked about and not as focused on. The next thing is how durable are shoes? How long are they lasting? How long is their protective life? And, the cleanest shoe is the one that really lasts the longest and does its job for the longest period of time. Next, we have to ask ourselves, how many shoes are we making and consuming a year? I understand the industry is making 24 billion pair of shoes a year and only selling 20 billion pair. Well, there's 4 billion pair of shoes that are doing nothing but adding to the carbon footprint, wasting raw materials, and sucking up resources. And the industry is going to have to deal with that reality and figure out how do we make fewer products or the right number of products. And I think finally, what are we going to do at the end of life for those shoes? When you think about, how are those shoes going to be either reused? I think of my friend Mo down in Florida with Sneaker Impacts, where he's collecting old shoes or end runs of shoes and repurposing them and giving them to people that need them. But this needs to be something that the industry embraces and figures out together. I think that if we're going to make cleaner footwear, we really have to think about breaking, and yes, I use the word breaking, the supply chain, because supply chain needs to move from a noun to a verb. We need to get actively involved in it, and you're going to hear from Sean and Joshua about that, because right now the key word in supply chain is chain. We are chained to dirty practices and dirty processes. We're chained to old habits, and we're chained to resource wasteful processes, such as throwing out millions of metric tons of foam a year. Think of almost every insole that's made in a blocker mold. We're trimming out the end of that and throwing that foam away because it has fabric on top of it. Is that really the best we can do as an industry and together? I don't think so. But in breaking that supply chain and doing what Sean and Joshua are doing and what BLUMAKA is trying to do, it's hard. You're going against the grain. We've probably all got some bloody noses from trying to do that. But what are the challenges of doing that? What does the industry need to know about that? And what can they learn from that? You know, at BLUMAKA, we're trying to make clean foam in a cleaner way. And it's not easy to start a new process in this industry to make cleaner foam. So, you know, those are a few of the things that I think about when I'm trying to think about how do we make cleaner shoes. If you really look at what we're doing at BLUMAKA, we're taking waste foam that's coming out of the back of shoe factories and we're incorporating that into new components. I think we're all wearing product made from it. And this process is using what's available. We don't think of foam as being a plastic, but foam is simply expanded plastic. And the benefit of foam or plastic is it lasts a long time. The downside of plastic is it lasts a long time. So you've got to use it for as long as possible and as many times as possible before you throw it away. And I'm not sitting here saying that every shoe should be made with recycled foam, but I am advocating that as an industry we think about where we use recycled foam and how we use it. And you know, this is our contribution to trying to make a cleaner footwear industry. But if you're trying to run a 2-hour marathon, that's probably a very good place to use virgin foam. But if you're trying to make or if you're making a slipper or a flip-flop or a casual shoe, are we going to get to the point where we say, look, using virgin foam to make a flip-flop or a casual shoe is environmental malpractice? It's just wrong. It's not being as thoughtful as we could be. I think there's that possibility. In fact, I would advocate for that. I think everybody, every brand, every designer, every developer should be looking at their line and saying, where are we going to use recycled materials? And foam is hard. I think the industry is doing a great job of using recycled materials in uppers. And you know, when you look at Josh, 80 or 99% recycled yarns, that's a great thing. When you think about what can the individual do, because we're all in this together, what is the consumer's role and what impact are they going to have on cleaner footwear? I think of just this one decision that we all get to make. And it's, how do you get that shoe from the warehouse or the distribution center to your front door? Do we really need the new shoe tomorrow, overnight? Because that has a bigger carbon footprint than getting it from the U.S. mail. You know, the mailman, he comes to the door 6 times a week. Isn't that enough? But the consumer gets to decide that. We get to decide that. And you're going to have to help the industry decide how we approach this. At BLUMAKA, we're making insoles. And we think we make one of the cleanest, greenest insoles on the planet. And I brought a little sample of our packaging, because packaging is something we don't really want to talk about. But this is a recycled paper mailer. We didn't print it. It's not all gussied up and fancy. We don't put our insoles in any other packaging. We just put them in here. And we did that out of respect for the environment. But do you care? Do we care? Do consumer cares? We could put this in much fancier packaging, but our carbon footprint goes up. We ship these USPS, not Federal Express or UPS, out of respect for the environment. I could ship it overnight, but my carbon footprint goes up. So what do you want? And I think this shows how we all have a chance to make a decision about how clean our shoes are. It's the little decisions. I don't think there's a perfectly clean shoe. I don't think there's the perfect answer. I think there are just better answers. And at BLUMAKA, we're trying to contribute to the consciousness of the industry to say, how do we make cleaner shoes? So I'm now going to throw it over to my friend Sean Scott at ComunityMade. You're bringing footwear manufacturing back to the United States. I know you have a lot to say, so I'd like to get you to react to a few of those ideas and tell us what it's like to break the supply chain.
I do like the clear words without mincing words. Yeah, we do need to break the supply chain. I think I'll tell a little bit about how I got into it. I feel like I was forced into breaking the supply chain. It really wasn't a deliberate plan like maybe Stuart or Josh did. But for me, I had been in the athletic shoe business for quite some time. I was spending a lot of time in Asia working with the factories there, and the factories I was in, it was okay. It seemed like the workers were pretty well taken care of. It seemed like I didn't see any egregious environmental violations, and it was okay. And I was patted myself on the back that I was providing jobs in this area that probably wouldn't have jobs otherwise, and I felt good about it. In my journey, I ended up at a startup that grew pretty rapidly. This was Tom's, if you guys know it. I was the footwear department, so I had to do everything. So when I went to Asia, I wasn't just in the key factories. I was in the subcontracted factories. I was in the supply factories. And what I saw in those factories broke my heart, especially since we were all at Tom's very passionate about doing the right thing. And in a lot of cases, we weren't. I saw underage labor. I saw labor that wasn't well taken care of. I saw pretty clear environmental abuses, bright green colored liquids getting dumped into a river that people were drinking and playing in. I saw coal factories not only every 10 miles, but new one being built, along the way. So, this stuff, if you have a conscience, it starts to weigh on you. And I had kind of a breakdown or epiphany, whatever you want to call it, in the shoe department of a discount retailer. And I saw shoes there, looked really great for the price point, and I just asked myself, boy, how are they able to do this? I was doing the same shoe for twice as much money. How are they able to do this? And all at once, it took 25 years, but all at once I understood that the way they're able to do that is by shortchanging people and the planet. And that was it. I was done. And I checked out. I didn't expect to get into the footwear business again. I had only ever known shoes being done in areas of low-cost labor. And at that point in time, I think it was like 98% of footwear was coming out of China specifically. But the idea wouldn't go away. And I started thinking about what it would be like to have shoes made nearby. And for one, I wouldn't have to get on a plane for 13 hours every time I wanted to look at samples. So there was that. But when I got away from the selfish reasons, there was also faster to market. There was more adaptable production. There was, and now we get into the sustainability aspects, there's less waste because you're building things closer. You have the opportunity to do just-in-time production, production made to order. There isn't that 20% waste that Stuart mentioned at the end of the line. And of course, that saves money as well. There's the opportunity for circularity. If you're going to be, which is the thing we should all be talking about, and a lot of us are, but if you're going to talk circularity, you can't be talking about the end-of-life product going back over to Asia to have it circularized. So it starts to make a lot more sense from a business, human, and planet perspective to be building things closer to where we are. when we talk about breaking the supply chain, somebody else threw it to me this way, so I didn't make it up. But this perspective, if you could go back 30 years, well, maybe more like 50 years, we did this great experiment where we sent all our production overseas, and we got these great low-cost shoes in return. But if at that point we had asked ourselves and said, here's how you're going to do business. You're going to have to put a whole ton of money up front to buy inventory that you may not need because the minimums are very high. It's going to take about 2 years to make that product, and about 6 months after that, you're going to get paid. So you're going to invest a whole crap ton of money and not see it for 2 years. You'd say, no way, that is a ridiculous way to do business. Yet, here we are, and a lot of us in this room, I know, that's the way we grew up. That's the paradigm we grew up with. And that needs to go out the window. It's just, honestly, it's just stupid. It serves big established businesses. It doesn't serve the consumer. It certainly doesn't serve small business. So,
So what's been the reaction to breaking the supply chain? People think you're crazy? Are you crazy?
well, you can't answer that. Does it take crazy to know crazy?
Probably.
The response for a little while, I was just talking to Kate, that early on it seemed like we were just simply crazy. Nobody heard us. And it took, unfortunately, it took a pandemic for people to wake up. And you know, when we said supply chain to people in 2019, you know, they would just fall asleep, or they start thinking about what they're going to have for lunch. And I didn't really blame them. I mean, I'm not sure there's a less sexy phrase in the English language than supply chain.
Well, because people don't really know what it means, right?
They do now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was the comment. But they do now, because everybody has a personal relationship to supply chain.
So if you could wave your magic wand and say, what do you think the top 1 or 2 things we can do to have a greener or cleaner footwear? Is it this, local to local manufacturing?
I think it's a combination of things. I think it may start with what you guys are doing. It may start with designing products that are made to be sustainable, thinking about end of life at the beginning of life. Mm-hmm. I do think a very important component of that is making things closer to where the customer is. On top of designing products to be sustainable, you need to think about where the raw materials are coming from and how the transportation plays into all of that. Right now, there are certain footwear companies that are making components in Brazil or other areas, shipping them to Europe for processing, and then shipping them to Asia to have the product manufactured, and then shipping it back around the world. I think, you know, that stuff needs to change. So I think we do need to start with what BLUMAKA is doing, designing things for end of life at the beginning of life, and then we do need to think about how we make things at that point.
Well, I think that's a good transition into our friend Joshua Katz over at KX Labs. I mean, you're living this. You've put your money where your mouth is. You're one of the few people I know that has actually built a shoe factory in the United States of America in the last 10 years, let alone the last year. Can you tell us about that journey and breaking the supply chain and your vision for cleaner footwear?
Sure. First of all, thank you, both of you guys, for having me here. The two of you were some of the earliest relationships that I built as I was first exploring what is now our first knit footwear manufacturing facility in the United States. And I remember sitting actually here with Sean and kind of showing him some renderings and kind of talking about you know the philosophy and the plans. And Sean and I kind of both looked at each other and acknowledged that it was almost like we were reading each other's decks, meaning reading each other's promotional materials or internal strategy documents. And I feel a great amount of gratitude for people like Sean who have for much longer than I, and perhaps at greater risk, taken on a very difficult and against the grain proposition. And certainly, Stuart, I like to say that, when I told Stuart what I was doing, he laughed a little bit, but has from the very beginning been very supportive, but I think reasonably skeptical of not the vision itself, but I think kind of our enduring commitment to see that vision through, and even our ability to do that. And although we, with KX, we are still literally day one as of today, meaning we just got our final permits on our first facility yesterday.
And by the way, I was there this morning, absolutely, completely, and totally blown away.
Yeah.
Everyone in the footwear industry should go and see that facility.
No, we don't want the secret to get out.
Okay, it's a
Yes,
secret.
we
Don't go.
We do want the secret.
We do want the secret to get out. In fact, it's.
So why is it the future of footwear?
I'd be hesitant to say that our facility, our process, or even our team is necessarily the future of footwear. I think, as you guys are acknowledging, is that we all have to be very much a part of the future of footwear, or at least our collective and aligned vision for what the future of footwear can look like. So I'll answer that in a moment, but I know I've kind of skirted the initial question as what is KX Lab, what is KX, what's the company? At its core, it's a knit footwear manufacturing facility right here in Los Angeles, just about 5-6 minutes away from ComunityMade. And it's no accident that we built our first facility here in Los Angeles. A, it's where I'm from, and B, it's in a lot of ways the epicenter of some of the most exciting things that are happening in the world writ large, across different cultural spheres and otherwise. And also, what I've noticed is that it also happens to be an epicenter for some of the most interesting and progressive things that are happening in footwear. Obviously clear acknowledgement to the long histories and incredible innovation that comes out of the Pacific Northwest and Boston, but there's a reason why a lot of those people are opening up their design centers, their innovation studios, all down here. As a knit footwear manufacturing facility, our basic premise is that, whether it's knit footwear or any other product, is we believe that products should be built, closer to the people that design those products, closer to the people that ultimately consume those products. It's over the last 50, 60, 70 years, collectively we've contributed to a systemic problem and a cycle that we're in where it's hard to do that. And the pain isn't just experienced by the environment. The pain, as you guys were saying, is experienced by the people that are designing the products. And downstream, whether they know it or not, the pain and the effects of that is experienced by the broader consumer set. So by creating a knit footwear manufacturing facility in Los Angeles and by bringing in the people and products closer together, our hope is to speed up the time that it takes to develop a new product, while at the same time allowing that development process to be not just more efficient, but create less waste, whether it's wasted time, wasted Zoom calls, wasted DHL packages going back and forth from facilities to facilities.
Or jet airplane tickets.
Well, it's an interesting point. I'll get back to the joys of building out a facility during the pandemic and supply chain crisis, but so actually I'll get to that. Because the urgency of this issue, I think, in this context of the last couple of years, has only created more of a need, I believe, for what it is that we're doing, right? And previously, you'd kind of make the joke about not letting or not wanting the world to know about it, or wanting the world to know about it. From the very beginning, the idea was that we wanted this to be both physically and metaphorically transparent. By being able to show how things are made and where things are made versus having to hide the terrible circumstances in which the components and full shoes and other products are made. not only allows us to give people like Sean an opportunity to make things responsibly and transparently and be able to tell a story that extends on the existing story that he's been building for a while, but the hope is that it also proves a point and puts the pressure on other people who are every day making a choice about how and where they make the products.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
You're making uppers out of 99% recycled content, something like that?
So about 98% of the yarn that we use is from recycled polyester or recycled rPET.
So in the spirit of how do we make cleaner shoes, with what you know today, Josh, is there any reason on earth that any footwear company needs to make an upper that is not 80 or 90% recycled content, or if it's not leather?
Stuart, you've been in the shoe business longer than perhaps I've been alive, so
you had to throw that in, didn't you? Ooh.
Yeah, so I would be hesitant to make any such grandiose or aggressive claims about what businesses should or should not do. The reality is there are certain things that, similar with foam, there are certain circumstances in which certain materials that cannot be recycled or coming from a post-consumer source, where they deliver value in a way that they need to deliver value. That said, similar to what with BLUMAKA and with recycled foam versus virgin foam, not every shoe needs to accord to the same durability or performance standards of a shoe that's designed for a 2-hour marathon. And so a lot of it comes down to using the right tools for the job. The problem is, historically, in the US or even otherwise, the tool and the job have been so far apart from each other that it's been very difficult to figure out if it is the right fit or if it's not.
Well, I love that answer, because it says, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
And if we're going to make cleaner shoes, we have to be realistic that they can't all be recycled foam or all recycled upper. It's better choices, but there are choices. So I really appreciate that answer, because that feels right to me, even though I've been in the industry longer than you've been around.
With all due respect.
So why don't we move now to our friend Todd Copeland from Copeland Environmental Consultancy. I got to know Todd when he was working in material science and sustainability with a little company in Ventura, California called Patagonia. He's gone on his own. He's done some LCA work in all transparency for BLUMAKA. But measuring what we're talking about, because cleaner, greener, sustainable, all of these fuzzy words, a lot of marketing people like to use them. And what you're talking about is how do we measure them, what should we be measuring, and what does that mean to the planet, and what does it mean for decision making? So Todd, help us understand how we should be thinking about measuring things like carbon footprint and water, and what's important, and maybe what we can do to do a little better.
Sure. Thank you, Stuart. That's an easy question.
For you.
Well, maybe I'll just introduce myself. I'm Todd Copeland from Copeland Consultancy. I have the least amount of footwear experience in the entire room, and I'm really honored to be on stage and be invited to chat with these folks here. They're doing really innovative stuff. I started my career in engineering as a polymer and textile chemist and did a lot of materials R&D. And then I shifted and kind of started to use all of that information for the good of the planet, for sustainability. That was where my passion was, and landed at Patagonia, not by chance, and got to work on things like looking at the full life cycle of a product. What inputs are we using? How do you identify preferred materials? Going on to what are the chemicals that are used in those materials, and how do you go towards a green chemistry? And then thinking even at the end of life, how do we design for the end of life? How do we bring things back and go full closed loop? So I think I was lucky to get to work on some of those projects before they were so commonly discussed, and spent 14 years at Patagonia. in various roles of sustainability. And then at some point focusing on supply chain, which I'm so glad was talked about already, because usually not the sexiest topic, but it's where a lot of those impacts happen. The majority of the environmental impacts, the social and labor impacts of making stuff is back in the supply chain. And a lot of companies don't even really know their supply chain that well. So when it comes to sustainability, a lot of times the first thing I say is know your supply chain and get to know them better, because once you start wanting to make things better, I mean, the material choices sometimes can be done without knowing too much, but when you get into more details, it's all about who's making it and where are they making it and how are they making it. So, you know, back to the question about measuring, I think, you know, people talk about LCA, which is life cycle assessment. It's a good tool to understand sustainability hotspots. It's thinking about the whole product life cycle, from extraction of raw materials to making materials to making finished products to, you know, how do you retail it, how do you use it, how do you care for it, and what happens when you're done. And it's good to think about it that way, and you can potentially identify what the impacts are throughout that life cycle and not just focus on one or two of those. So I think it's an important exercise. I don't think it's the source of all truth. There's also different things you can measure. We've been talking about carbon footprint, GHG emissions, and climate change and all of that. But there's tons of other things that are relevant. So I know climate is important. It is absolutely critical that the entire world focuses on solving this problem as quickly as possible. It affects everybody, and everybody's part of the problem. But there are a lot of other problems too. We got water, we got pollution, we got, you know, biodiversity, deforestation. These are all issues as well. And you know, the list could go on and on and on. I'm not saying don't focus on climate, but we can focus on other things as well.
So when you say focus on climate, that's carbon?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Carbon and GHG emissions and
I was
however
the
else
half
you
of the
want to
class
say
that made the top half possible, so I just wanted to be clear here.
Let's try not to talk jargon. So I would say it's important to decide, you know, try to think about what is important. When I consult with companies now as an advisor, we usually start with something called a materiality assessment, which is what environmental or sustainability aspects are most relevant for your company. And it is different depending on the product you make and how the company is you know, put together, and even who's running it. You know, what do they really care the most about? And we'll find that it's slightly different for every company. But the idea is that you want to focus on the issues that are most relevant for your company, your products, and then where in that life cycle are the biggest, you know, hotspots. And so if you can do that, I think then you can be more effective on measuring better, reducing impacts, you know, innovating about where you should be innovating on new ideas and new ways of doing things, and then finally, how are you communicating about it? Because I think greenwashing is a real thing. It's the idea that, you know, companies are talking about sustainability and they're not doing sustainability, or they're not doing as much as they say they're doing.
So focusing on carbon is a good thing, I think. I think we got to give a lot of credit to people who have led that charge of reducing carbon footprint. And it seems to me the industry is doing a fairly good job of that. What would you say in footwear would be the next one or two things that we should add to it, not replace it, but add to that good work if we're going to be reporting and helping make a cleaner shoe?
Sure. There has been progress made. There is a lot more progress to be made, and we have to make it faster. So the climate, the GHG emissions thing, we still need to focus on it. A big one is renewable electricity. Another one is being more efficient. And another one is maybe changing the business models. Like, I don't know if we can really keep making stuff and selling stuff and reduce the GHG emissions to the level that we need to, that the scientists are saying we need to avoid a climate catastrophe. So thinking about, do we really need to just make however many billions of shoes are made each year? Can companies be profitable without making new stuff? Can you still have a healthy business by offering services in footwear? Maybe it's, you know, going for a longer life cycle of a product. Can it be repaired? Can it be used longer? Those things are really important if businesses can think about changing the actual business model. But to your question, so that's difficult. That's a big nut to crack.
Yeah.
And then we need to be addressing these other things as well. And so with footwear, water is a significant issue. It's location specific. In LA, water is an issue. There's a lot of places in the world where manufacturings happen where water is scarce. The demand for water is higher than the supply.
Particularly clean water.
Yeah, because what can you do with dirty water?
Right.
So it is related to water pollution as well. So that's a big issue, and there's a lot of water used, for example, in some of the raw material production, but also if you think about cooling molds and things like that, there's a lot of water use. So there's opportunity there. And I would say chemicals is the other one. Chemicals that have the potential to harm workers, harm communities, and get into the environment and persist in the environment.
So mold releases, cements, things like that.
Yeah,
Perfect.
a lot of volatile organic chemicals in the solvents. The stuff that smells really strong and gives you a headache or knocks you over when you walk into a big footwear factory, that's a big problem.
So perhaps you could also help us. We see, you've mentioned greenwashing, and we're starting to see things reported more transparently, i.e. people's carbon footprint. How do we know that a carbon footprint is low or high? I see a number, and I don't know whether it's a good number or a bad number, but I think all of us would like to know. So is there a way to think about that globally in context, or is that individual?
It's a great point. There is, a number means nothing without context. So what is the standard? What is a good number for a shoe? What is the average number for a shoe? Or a factory? What if you're talking about a company? What's a good number? It's really hard to say. There are different ways to measure too. So even if I told you this is what I came up with, I don't know if it would be the same if somebody else did it, because even within the guardrails of doing these calculations in a right way, you can make different choices, different assumptions, and scope it differently, which would change those numbers.
Are there any things that you wish all companies would report on? GHG, waste, water? Wave your magic wand and you're king for a day, and here's how we would help hold people accountable to make a cleaner shoe.
Yeah. It's hard. I think the transparency is good. Being more, I'm not a marketing guy, but I tend to see marketing that just tells you the good part. And I always question it, I'm always skeptical about it. What are they not telling me? And I feel a lot better when the message is more complete. So tell me what you're working on next. Tell me what is not that great yet, but you want it to be. Because I don't want companies to not do good things just because it can't be perfect. That's not the right approach. We all need to be doing the good things we can do now. But we also need to be thinking about what are the better things we can do next. And maybe even communicating that so people understand that you're on a path of continuous improvement, kind of like what you were talking about, making things always better. Don't let perfect be the enemy of doing good, right? I think those types of messages would be really powerful. And again, maybe hard to do in marketing, but even on websites, sustainability reports, more information would be better.
Yeah, I appreciate that concept. I think we feel so much pressure as a brand to have the perfect answer, to be the perfect solution, or to be the solution for everything. And I appreciate the encouragement to just tell the truth and tell what you're doing and what you hope to do, and perhaps that is good enough. So why don't we open this up for some questions? Shannon, did anybody send in some questions? Do we have some local questions? Are there some topics you'd like to go ahead, Sean? I can't wait to hear this.
Go to the audience.
Audience questions.
Audience questions. Who's going to pick those up? What?
Oh, we're looking for a microphone, folks. We're not stuttering.
We're not ignoring all the questions.
Actually, I have a comment add on while that's happening. I think it's great marketing to say we're not perfect. I actually think
I agree.
If you say these are the things we're doing well and these are the things we're struggling with, that just tells your customer that you respect them and you bring them along for the journey. It ties them closer to you. That nobody's perfect. People want to know that you're a real entity, that you don't do everything right. Also, I believe those same customers are going to hold you accountable to make progress on that. If 2 years later you're still saying we're struggling with the same thing, they're going to hold you accountable, and you're going to be forced to step up your game. So I actually really like the idea of saying we're not perfect.
Cool.
Question?
Okay, I have a question, mostly for Sean, but I guess for everybody. I know we talked a little bit earlier about how hard it is to fully localize your supply chain because there are certain components that just aren't available locally. How do you see that changing going forward? Is that something that can change? Can you reasonably expect like shoelaces to be made here at some point? Or, some of the different synthetic materials that we're sourcing from overseas?
Well, Kate from Sourcing Journal, it's not going to be easy. It's going to take some investment from these suppliers. So I do think it's easier now than it was a few years ago to go to a shoelace supplier and say, look, there is a clear movement of businesses, footwear businesses, bringing their business, nearshoring their business. If you step up your service game, aside from just government contracts or service contracts, if you can adjust your service to serve smaller growing businesses, it can be profitable. I think it was hard 2 or 3 years ago to say that. I do believe you can say that now. And there are innovative companies stepping in like BLUMAKA. There are outsole suppliers who are promising to step up. So it's changing, but it's going to somebody's going to have to invest, with a little bit of risk, no doubt, and we're all just going to have to keep hustling. Yeah.
Kate, I would say also that it's define what local means. Mexico City might be closer to here than New York City, and I think before we think completely local, like in LA or even in the United States, we need to think regionally. So if we're going to change the supply chain for footwear, I think we've got to start bringing things back to the region, the Americas, to Europe, to Asia. I think if you break it first in those 3 sectors, I believe it would be salubrious to greener products. I mean, BLUMAKA, we just opened we're starting to build out our facility in Central America right now. It's a 100% solar-powered facility with on-site health care. We think that's a good step. The next step is, do you need to bring that to Los Angeles? Well, when I watch what Joshua has done, I'm green with envy. But I think we move. I think we need to think regionally and then really locally. So I think it's a step-by-step thing. Other questions? Got a question over here.
To all of you. There are big national brands, athletic brands that we all know, that create, I would say, confusion among their consumers by marketing their green initiatives. So as a consumer, I buy that shoe because they're saying, yep, we're more green, we have our standard, and we're the best at it. And how do I know as a consumer they're actually doing anything? There is no standard that I'm aware of, and how do we make consumers aware? We can be talking all the sustainability we want, but until the consumer gets it, it's going to be really challenging.
My sense of that, David, is that we need to be careful to look at this glass either half full or half empty. 15 years ago, nobody cared, and I was with a footwear brand that tried to care, and the consumers didn't care, and the consumers are caring. And when you take a company like Allbirds, who didn't exist 6 or 7 years ago, put their foot in the ground and said, we're going to make a commitment to this message of low carbon, natural materials, biofoams. They're now a very valuable and respected company because they put their foot in the ground. So what I would say is, I think the industry is moving in a very positive direction. I think it can be confusing, but if we're going to win, these big companies need to support small brands and small innovations that are going to lift us up. They're going to need to support the change with orders, because innovation generally comes from smaller organizations, and that doesn't necessarily transition into big companies well, and they need to embrace those things, because that's what's going to lift up the industry. Continuing to go back to the broken supply chain, I don't think is going to work.
I was going to say, you know, similarly, I think it's a good thing that they're doing these initiatives, and I would just try to say, you know, does it really resonate? Are they really focusing on the biggest issues here? And maybe not just product by product, but what are they doing as a company? Are they really committed to making significant improvements in their total footprint? And are they just talking carbon? Are they talking about these other really important areas like water and chemicals and pollution? You know, and what's validating that? You know, because there's not a lot of regulations that are requiring this stuff. So a lot of it's voluntary, and that's where it's a little wild, wild west. So are there standards out there and certifications that they're aligning with?
What are the existing or leading standards and certifications that would be accessible to larger brands and smaller brands and businesses that you would be a proponent of? Or if one does not exist, how would you fashion that?
Yeah, there are a lot. So I think sometimes it comes down to what are you talking about. If you're talking about recycled, then do you have a recycled certification? There are a few that exist that are better than not having a certification. None of this stuff's perfect. You know,
How does a consumer know if one recycled certification is more legitimate than the other, or is simply a self-appointed arbitrary certification?
it's hard to know.
Otherwise,
I would say if they really want to look into it, there are kind of groups that are more interested in protecting customers, people, and the environment that rate these things. They rate companies, and they also rate standards. And you can look at what they're saying and see, you know, which ones are kind of bubbling to the top. I think that's about the most independent review that you can get.
I think the best standard is ethical and moral leadership that cares. And that's going to matter more than any outside third-party certificate.
Is that a Stuart standard?
It is.
But if everybody says that that's what they are,
I
it's
know.
hard to take a self-declaration.
But it will certainly transcend. You know,
I agree. Yeah.
You know, it's, what is it? Statistics and liars or
Right.
something. You know.
Yeah, but part of my question was about also its accessibility to these, you know, legitimate third-party validations for businesses of all types and sizes, right?
Yeah.
But it's also, I mean, simply the fact and the way that you have to answer that indicates that accessibility to consumers requires research, a vetting process, and then a subjective evaluation based off of that data that has been collected through the confusion of marketing and all the above to then make a personal decision. Seems to me like, you know, that's a fundamental problem. And
well, to get certified, you have to pay somebody. You
This is
pay
my-
somebody
this
to
is-
be certified. It's like
this is my point, right?
it's like you get to pay your professor for your grade a little bit, and I'm not sure that that's the
Understood.
best, but it's better than nothing.
It's better than nothing.
And I think it's, again, progress and not perfect. Do we have other questions?
I've got a question for the whole panel. My name is Kevin, and I've been in the industry longer than Josh has been alive as well.
Thank
24 years.
Thank goodness.
Times two. The question would be, you're really trying to drive change, and have you been approached by any of the university programs or design academies, Art Center here in Pasadena, the sports marketing program at U of O out of Portland, where you can have an influence on these young people that want to learn the industry versus trying to change a shoe dog's mind. I mean, you can change, a dog can learn a new trick, and some of us are evident of that. But to get in on the ground floor, to really have installed, have you been invited by these programs to come and speak about your mission so that you can make an impression on the people that are going to change the industry in the future?
Kevin, I'm glad you brought that up. Because the answer is I have not been approached or have not approached. However, this is actually the first time that I've, outside of small group of people that have been supporting us as we've been developing our business, this is the first time I've spoken about KX.
You're 24 years old. You can't expect to be asked.
I'm still figuring it out. But so the truth is that's very much central to my aspirations for our business. And in fact, the way that we've structured the physical space, the business model, and so on, is designed to invite that type of engagement in. So assuming that we have all the universities and design institutes all watching right now, this would be a great time for me to say that KX is very much looking forward to doing that. And I think the other
And his speaking fees are very reasonable.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have actually been approached. We've worked with Art Center in Pasadena, and we worked with Otis over on the west side.
Who is Otis on the west side?
Otis Design School on the west side. Thanks, dude. It wasn't deliberate. It came out of networking. I think all of us here, where most of the world doesn't know we exist. Most of the world doesn't know that there's innovative, sustainable footwear practice happening here in the U.S. So I think the more people find out, I mean, a panel like this is great, the more those opportunities are going to open up. And Kevin, I totally agree. Changing old shoe dog minds is going to be difficult, especially bigger, they're slower moving companies. Even if they want to change, it's going to take time. It's going to be the young designers who they won't accept doing business any other way. They're going to make things happen.
I've given a couple talks to design classes, Art Center, and out in New England. So I've done that several times on Zoom in the last year. I don't know anyone at the University of Oregon in that program. I do want to give a shout out to the FDRA, the Footwear Retailers and Distributors Association, what Matt Priest and Andy Polk are doing, I think, to educate shoe dogs, and their push on that has been outstanding. And I think that's been a really good forum to share new ideas, and particularly around greener footwear. So I think we've had some opportunities. If people find this valuable, obviously willing to share and continue to push for change. Question, Michael.
Yes, thank you guys for hosting this. It's a great event, and I feel like everyone in this room is sort of an innovator at the tip of the iceberg, I would say. And for example, like David and I both have made shoes for people like Walmart, like Target, and if it started from the top, from these people who buy, if you talk about all these pairs of footwear, I mean, they are the biggest producer of footwear, and if those buyers, those corporations forced the companies that like David and I would go to Asia for to build the cheapest shoes possible, shoes that Sean had mentioned that he saw and sees, like, how do we do this? Because they do drive costs down through that, and it's almost like the reverse. And so I think from a PLM standpoint, designer standpoint, I think certainly anyone young coming out of design school, even our kids, are being taught what goes in your body, what goes on your clothing, and they're more interested in that than I'd say we were when we were kids. We didn't really give it too much thought at that time. So anyway, any thought about that? Have you had conversations with larger organizations to help? We have been, BLUMAKA has been approached by some very large organizations, and our stance at this point is we're not big enough to service them. I mean, we're trying to build factories and
That's a challenging proposition, 6,000 miles away during a pandemic. I've built a factory that I've never been able to go in or see or bring anybody to. But we have been approached, and I do think there's receptiveness on these big brands. They want to do the right thing. I think we have to be thoughtful about the consumer too, because it's easy for people to sit in Los Angeles and the wealth that's in this community and say, hey, you know, if you have to pay another $50 for a pair of shoes, no problem. There's a part of the market for that. But you know, I was in the service footwear business where I talked to a single mom who said, geez, you know, that $29 pair of shoes that you want me to buy, I've got to put it on 3 payments, and it's tough because I got to buy food for my kids, I'm making minimum wage, and I got to get groceries on the table and medicine. And so these big boxes, you know, they're serving this purpose, but I think if we build this groundswell underneath it and get our technologies good enough, it will go there. I think they want to do the right thing. I'm going to assume goodness and good intent, but that's been my feeling. We're just not big enough to service them yet. I mean, you know, my father reminded me that an elephant could love you and still kill you, and so I'm going to avoid the elephant for a while.
It's great.
I was just going to say, you know, as a consultant, I work with some of those big companies as well as the small innovators who are doing completely new stuff, and it's, you know, night and day experiences. But I don't think, you know, some of these big companies, they do want to change. They have pretty sophisticated strategies. They see that they need to do this. They're getting pressure from investors. They're getting pressure from customers. They're getting, you know, pressure from all directions. And you know, some of them have been doing it for a while, and now they're accelerating and they're kind of thriving in that space. And other ones who haven't done it before are scrambling to figure out what can they do. And as long as they're doing it with intent to actually change and they're putting resources towards that change, I feel pretty good about helping them along that path.
Okay, we have a question in from the legend David Smith. Nike, Adidas, and Under Armour have all recently tried to produce footwear in North America, and they failed. What needs to be done differently to succeed, in your opinion? Maybe the guys that are making shoes here can comment.
I think part of it has to do with you know, an emphasis on things that maybe aren't the best things to emphasize right now. If it's strictly about matching costs that you're getting out of Asia, I don't think that's really the goal right now. The goal really should be to focus on service, and there are lots of great services you can offer. There's mass customization technology is available now that probably, to be fair, wasn't available. I know they really wanted to do speed to market. At least one of those guys wanted to do speed to market. And I'm not sure the technology was totally available. The automation wasn't totally ready. So, I mean, they should get some credit. Honestly, they should get some credit for making the effort. But I think a lot of credit, actually, for making the effort. But I think we have service available now that maybe wasn't available then. Technology that allows mass customization, that allows personalization, and then focus on adaptability, that you can test market a product before you go and mass produce it. I'm not sure I've seen a lot of that being done, and we really can. And this ends up reducing the waste, the 4 billion pairs that Stuart mentioned. It ends up reducing that 4 billion pairs waste.
Yeah, I would say famous Dave Smith, I would say the big brands need to think smaller, and they need to think better. If you will, be willing to test things, go smaller, incubate really high-end, high-performance, fresh, innovative ideas without saying we got to go make a million pair of these the first year to be successful. Management needs to be patient with them. Management needs to, you know, it's like a little kid's teddy bear. You got to hug it and hold it and kiss it and sleep with it and wake with it, and then it will bloom and blossom into a full-blown relationship. And I think you got to take a little bit of the Tesla playbook and say, you know, let's stop trying to do what they do in Asia, because they do what they do in Asia very well. Very well. But let's not try to replicate that. I mean, I'll tell you, nothing frosts my pumpkin more than this idea that, hey, you know, we've got this great PU midsole out of Asia. Can you make one that looks just like that, that's 85% recycled content by volume and 50% recycled content by weight? Well, why the hell would I do that? Let's do something different. And so think bigger, or think smaller, and think better would be my answer to what the big brands do, and have some patience. Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I think to build off of Stuart's point, which is I think the attempting to build footwear in the U.S. either by replicating the types of products or the overall production model that's currently the current paradigm, or trying to return back to how shoes were made here, however many decades ago that they were made here, is a fundamental error. And I'm not attributing that error to anybody who's attempted it before. I just think that if you think about making things today, you need to look at what the opportunities and limitations are of today, whether it's in footwear or anything else. And so for us, you know, the reason that, you know, we're making a big bet specifically with knit footwear is because we believe that knit footwear allows for a level of automation that allows us to create new jobs that are highly skilled jobs. And two, it allows us to engage in a construction process that drastically diminishes the amount of marginal waste. And to your point about chemicals is the amount of toxic glues and adhesives. You know, to make a shoe that's made in, you know, a country in Asia or elsewhere in the world in the same way in Los Angeles would be impossible. And that's not just because of the cost. It's because of everything that has to go into that shoe that now is the shoe that has 30 different components to it, multiple different urethane, polyurethane-based components, and so on and so forth. So we tried to step back and say, okay, well, what can be made here? What can be made here responsibly? What could conceivably be made here at scale? And then what are those parameters? What are those limitations? And then how can we operate and thrive within those parameters versus trying to replicate or get as close to the item, for example, the EVA midsole that is made cheaply and en masse in Asia.
Well,
and that's the experiment, and that's the question.
That's the experiment.
But we've got a pretty strong thesis on it.
I think that's a brilliant point. I mean, there's a reason that footwear got offshored, because it's a dirty, nasty, filthy process that requires a lot of labor that's expensive. If we're going to bring footwear back to the United States, we need to onshore thinking, intellectual property, new ideas. We can't simply onshore or reshore all of the crap that we offshored. And Josh and Joshua, what you guys are doing is you're onshoring intellectual property in a very thoughtful way and not onshoring all the problems that we offshored. Now, idealistically, we'd like to say now that will go to Asia and so forth. So that's where we are.
I'll add one more thing, and actually, Sean, you brought it up. It was that idea of circularity. If you're producing locally in your market, you can create circular products. And so that's something that these big companies should be thinking about. To really focus on their footprint, they need to start thinking about how do they service their customers in a new way. And if you have a factory in like local community, you can do that. And that becomes very interesting.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming to the Clean Footwear Summit or discussion. This is meant to be an ongoing dialogue. We'd like to have it next time. I'd like to have I love all these guys and respect them, but I'd like to have a little more diverse panel. We kind of got shortchanged on gender equity this time, but we'll keep this discussion
I'll do my
going.
best
Well,
for the next time.
yeah, I'm just glad you copied my haircut. But anyway, We're delighted to that you've joined us in this. We hope it's stirred some thoughts. I would like to close with a quote from my mentor when I started in the footwear business 45 years ago, and he said, "The most valuable and abundant resource in the world are ideas, and they're free. All you have to do is think." And I believe that that is both true and brilliant and profound. And as we think about making cleaner footwear, let's just keep thinking, and let's invite everyone into that thought process, because together we can make better decisions day by day and make better, cleaner footwear. Thank you so very much.
Good stuff, dude.